October 13th, 1972. A Uruguayan Air Force plane carrying 45 people vanishes without a trace somewhere over the Andes Mountains. No distress signal, no wreckage, no survivors, or so the world believed. The Andes stretch nearly 5,000 miles along the spine of South America, with peaks rising over 20,000 feet. In October, they are already locked in winter. Temperatures plunge to 40 below zero at night. Winds tear across the ridgelines at hurricane force. Nothing survives up there. Nothing is supposed to. Flight 571 was carrying the old Christians rugby team from Montevideo, Uruguay, young men, most of them college students, some barely 20 years old. They were flying to Santiago, Chile for a match. They brought sandwiches, wine, laughter. They had no idea they were flying into the deadliest natural trap on Earth. The pilots began their crossing through a mountain pass called Planchon. But the cloud cover was thick and deceptive. Believing they had already cleared the mountains, they began their descent. Too early, too low. At 3:34 in the afternoon, the right wing clipped a mountain ridge. Then the left wing tore away. The fuselage, the hollow metal tube where the passengers sat, rocketed down the slope like a bullet and slammed into a snowfield at over 200 miles per hour. 29 people survived the initial crash. 12 were dead before nightfall. What remained was a broken aluminum shell at 14,000 feet, surrounded by nothing but white. No trees, no shelter, no way down. The survivors searched the wreckage for food and found almost nothing. A few chocolate bars, some crackers, a handful of jams. Enough, maybe, for a week. On day 8, one of the survivors managed to get a small transistor radio to work. He tuned through static, through silence, and then he heard it. A news broadcast. Uruguayan search and rescue had suspended operations. The mountains were too vast, the snow too deep, the weather too violent. Officially, everyone aboard Flight 571 was presumed dead. The survivors turned off the radio. No one spoke for a long time. They had two choices: wait for a rescue that was never coming, or find a way to survive long enough to rescue themselves. But surviving at 14,000 feet with almost no food, in temperatures that froze exposed skin in minutes, required something the human mind resists with everything it has. The bodies of those who had died in the crash were still preserved in the snow around them. The survivors understood, one by one, in private moments of reckoning, what staying alive was going to require. It was Gustavo Zerbino, a medical student, who finally said what others could not, that the dead would want the living to survive, that this was not savagery, that this was love. They made the decision, and they lived. On day 17, an avalanche buried the fuselage in the middle of the night, killing 8 more while they slept. The survivors dug themselves out from under 10 feet of snow with their bare hands. They had now been on that mountain for over 2 weeks. They were frostbitten, malnourished, and broken, and still, they refused to die. 2 men, Nando Parado and Roberto Canessa, made a final decision. They would walk out, over the mountains, with no map, no climbing equipment, no real knowledge of which direction led to safety. Parado later said he was not brave. He said he simply chose to move because standing still meant death. For 10 days they climbed, through blizzards, over glaciers. At one point, Parado looked ahead and saw, stretching to every horizon, nothing but more mountains. He kept walking. On December 20th, 1972, 72 days after the crash, a Chilean farmer named Sergio Catalan spotted 2 ragged, hollow-eyed figures on the far bank of a river. He threw them bread and paper so they could write a message. Canessa scrawled, "I come from a plane that fell in the mountains. I am Uruguayan." Within hours, helicopters were in the air. 16 survivors were brought down from the mountain alive. The story they carried with them was one the world was not entirely prepared to receive. Journalists asked difficult questions. Priests gave careful answers. But the survivors themselves were clear. They had done what they had to do to come home, and they had done it together. Nando Parado lost his mother and his sister in that crash. He walked out of the Andes anyway. Roberto Canessa became a pediatric cardiologist. He has spent his life since then saving the hearts of children. 45 people boarded that plane. 16 walked back into the world. They did not survive because the mountain showed mercy. They survived because human beings, when stripped of everything, every comfort, every certainty, every illusion of control, are capable of something the cold cannot touch. They chose each other.